Today we'll talk about William Shakespeare, the man whose name became a synonym for great drama, mystery, and genius with words. We'll trace Shakespeare's path from his first steps on stage to the creation of his greatest tragedies and see how he played not only with language, but with the human soul itself. You'll hear how his comedies, full of transformations, wit, and delicate irony, were born. You'll learn what images lie behind his late plays, and how he himself, it seems, quietly took leave of the stage. We'll speak about the mystery of his authorship. Who else might have stood behind these plays, and why the debate hasn't faded for centuries? And finally, you'll see how Shakespeare changed theater, cinema, language, and the very way we think about the human being. Why do presidents quote him, directors film him, and schoolchildren stage him? Why 4 centuries later does he still sound modern? This is the story not just of a playwright, but of a person who changed the world forever without leaving the stage. Suggest topics for new videos in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. Bedtime stories appear here every day.
Stratford beginnings, childhood and family. In the very heart of England, among the gentle hills of the county of Warwickshire, by the calm waters of the river Avon, lay a small town whose name would later be forever linked to the greatest dramatist of all time. Stratford-upon-Avon in the 15th century was a modest trading center of about 1,500 people, artisans, shopkeepers, farmers, and churchmen. It was here, in the spring of 1564, in a house on Henley Street, that a boy was born who would go on to rethink theater, language, and our idea of human nature. His name was William Shakespeare. The house belonged to his father, John Shakespeare, a glover and dealer in wool, leather, and grain, an ambitious man who bought several houses, held municipal offices, and was elected bailiff, essentially the mayor of Stratford. His wife, Mary, came from a prosperous family, owned part of her father's estate, and descended from an old line tracing back to knighthood. Their marriage united urban capital and rural gentility, making the Shakespeares a notable family in local society. William was the third of 8 children, though child mortality was high. Only 5 survived. His exact date of birth is unknown, but it is generally assumed to be April 23, a date that later became symbolic, since on that same day, 52 years later, he would die, leaving an immortal legacy. Stratford's daily life was closely bound to the rhythms of nature: sowing and harvest, fairs, church feasts, street processions, and ordinary concerns. There were no universities here, but there were masters and merchants whose children, like William, learned to observe the living earthly world. He grew up among people whose faces, speech, habits, and passions he would later render with striking depth on stage. Little is known of his early education. He likely attended the King's New School in Stratford, near the church. Tuition was free for officials' sons, and children started around age 7. Instruction was in Latin. Even in the lower forms, students memorized Cicero, Ovid, and Virgil, translated from Latin to English and back, studied rhetoric and logic, and took part in public disputations. School ran 6 days a week, from around 6 in the morning to evening, with only a short break for dinner. Corporal punishment was used. The upbringing was severe, as was the age. Yet it was probably here that his love for words, drama, and classical plots and images took shape, motifs that would later come alive on the stage of the globe. Life wasn't limited to school. Holidays, fairs, and performances by traveling players on the market square were part of everyday experience. Troops visited periodically, and the young William could well have seen simple plays on biblical or mythological themes. These shows with jesters, disguise, applause, and carnival freedom impressed, especially in contrast to strict school days. He grew up in a country undergoing serious change. After the break with Rome, England had become Protestant, but pre-Christian folk customs lingered. Spring rites, evening tales, beliefs, and old songs. It was a world where medieval symbolism coexisted with Renaissance ideas, magic with the letter of the law, fate with human will. Against this backdrop, his worldview formed, without sharp oppositions, but with attention to detail and inner conflict. The ideal didn't last. In the early 1570s, the family's position declined. John lost political standing and avoided paying a church levy. His name vanished from civic records. He was struck from the roll of council attendees. Debts, failed deals, or political disagreements, no one knows. The result was a drop in social status, likely affecting William's prospects. One hypothesis is that he left school to help in his father's workshop or on the market, as many teenagers did, learning a trade, helping in the shop, and looking closely at an adult world that demanded his independence. This period, filled not only with study but with real responsibilities, helped forge his character and inner life. We don't know what he felt walking Stratford streets, past stone houses, leather and spice shops, noisy taverns, the voices of merchants, the silent prayers of widows, the sighs of craftsmen, the cries of infants. But reading his plays, one senses he saw and heard everything, an attentive witness able to draw universal meaning from ordinary scenes.
The mysterious years: marriage, children, disappearance. Nearly 2 years later, the couple had twins, a girl, Judith, and a boy, Hamlet, named after Hamnet Sadler, one of Shakespeare's closest friends and a respected townsman. Judith was named after Sadler's wife. This points to warm ties between the families and shows that William and Anne were embedded in Stratford society. After the children's births, a mysterious period begins. Shakespeare vanishes from all sources for almost 7 years. No letters, legal acts, town business, tax rolls, or church records. The next reliable date is 1592, when a pamphlet by playwright Robert Greene mentions him as a newcomer rapidly rising to fame in London. What happened in those lost years? History is silent. Imagination is not. Hypotheses include a schoolmaster in northern England among Catholic families, which could explain religious restraint in the plays, a notary's assistant, a fairground trader, or a hand with touring companies passing through the provinces, including Stratford. A durable local legend claims he poached deer on the estates of Sir Thomas Lucy, was punished, fled to London, and even wrote a satirical verse about Lucy. No text survives, but the story reveals society's need for an exile origin myth. He may have lived partly in Stratford and partly away, working without leaving archival traces. His wife and children seemingly remained in Stratford with his mother. Nothing suggests family rupture. Later, when fame came and he bought a house in Stratford, he returned there for holidays and, in the end, for good. The absence of documents doesn't prove the absence of life. People conducted business and traveled without leaving paper trails. He might have written, for himself, for others, for the stage, read, learned, tried acting, toured, or served in a great household. These shadowed years stocked the inner storehouse that would burst onto his pages. Their marriage is also wrapped in mystery. Age difference, decades of living apart, scant mention of Anne in his will. Much is made of the bequest of the second-best bed, often read literally, but possibly a tender reference to the marital bed. However one reads it, by the early 1590s, he appears in London as a dramatist, tied to the theater. The prior darkness isn't emptiness. It's a camera obscura of guesses and halftones that deepen the aura of mystery.
London and the stage, a path to theater. By the early 1590s, London seethed, a vast city of over 100,000, its streets tight and noisy, markets crowded, the bridge over the Thames lined with houses and shops.
Alongside trade and crafts, a vibrant, talkative, sometimes coarse, but always passionate theater thrived. Here, Shakespeare truly entered public life, and his road to immortality began. The first solid mention of him as a playwright comes in 1592 in A Groat's Worth of Wit, published posthumously under Robert Greene's name, sneering at an upstart crow, daring to rival university-educated writers, a jab widely read as aimed at Shakespeare, the talented non-graduate rising fast. By then, he was linked with the Lord Chamberlain's men, among England's most successful troupes. He began as an actor, touring, taking small roles suited to his age and voice. Later, in Hamlet, he puts into a character's mouth advice to actors natural, restrained, echoes of that world. Soon he was writing early pieces like The Comedy of Errors, The Taming of the Shrew, and Titus Andronicus, spanned farce to bloody tragedy, showing Marlowean influence and popular comedy, yet already marked by quick observation, lively dialogue, and the fusion of high and everyday that became his signature. Life on stage taught him to see a play from the inside, where laughter erupts, breath catches, or attention sags. Late 16th century London's open-air theaters stood outside the city walls, beyond stricter oversight. The Theatre, the Rose, the Swan. Shows ran by daylight, mostly afternoons. Crowds ranged from apprentices to nobles. In the pit stood the groundlings, paying a penny, heckling or cheering. Shakespeare knew how to work this audience, packing early plays with action, wordplay, satire, and twists. He wrote for speaking, not merely reading. His characters were quick, agile, polyphonic. History plays like Henry VI or Richard II buttressed patriotic feeling at Elizabeth I's court and pleased both commoners and elites. After plague closures, he strengthened his position, becoming not just house author, but shareholder, steady income, and a say in the company's fate. In 1599, the company built its own theater, the Globe, on the south bank at Southwark, reusing timbers from the theater. The Globe, a round, open-roof playhouse seating up to 3,000 with a thrust stage and galleries, was unique. Shakespeare wasn't only its author, but co-owner, earning profit shares, writing for specific actors. Chief among them was Richard Burbage, for whom Hamlet, Othello, and Lear were written, and comedian Will Kemp, whose jigs and improvisations shaped clowns and servants of the early comedies. The theater ran hot, shows nearly daily, repertory changing fast, short rehearsals, reused costumes, minimal scenery. Poetry did the work of spectacle. Castles, storms, battlefields, conjured by words. Under James I, the troupe gained royal patronage as the King's Men, performing also at court, peak recognition, and a new phase of craft. Before the late philosophical dramas, he would create the works that fixed his name forever: Hamlet, Macbeth, and Richard. Tragedies and genius: Romeo, Hamlet, and Kings. By the early 17th century, Shakespeare was central to London theatre. In tragedy, he reached greatest depth, turning drama from diversion into revelation, where fate and choice, passion and reason, duty and desire collide. Romeo and Juliet draws on Arthur Brooks' poem, itself from an Italian novella, but Shakespeare accelerates action, deepens character, makes the lovers younger and more vulnerable. Juliet's monologues, Tybalt's fire, Mercutio's zest, and Friar Lawrence's wary wisdom create a tragedy that grows not from pure evil, but from a flawed world and adults unready for youth's force. If Romeo and Juliet is the drama of passion, Hamlet is the tragedy of thought.
The Danish prince, told by his father's ghost of murder, plunges into doubt. To be or not to be becomes genuine metaphysical hesitation, life as suffering versus death as the unknown. His trouble isn't aimlessness, but understanding consequences. Its universality explains the play's afterlife. Burbage's Hamlet reportedly held audiences even in silence. The text survives in multiple versions, the so-called bad quarto, likely from actors' memory or audience notes, and later fuller texts, evidence of its live popularity. In Othello, from Cinthio's Hecatomythe, the Moor, great soldier yet outsider, is undone by Iago, a cool manipulator who corrodes trust with surgical precision. The tragedy is blind faith, where love and betrayal walk hand in hand and words are weapons. The strangling of Desdemona is a boundary of passion, rage, and inner collapse. Macbeth, written soon after James I's accession, probes power, ambition, and fear. Spurred by witches' prophecy, Macbeth kills the king and is trapped by his acts. He loses himself, unmoored from reality and conscience. Lady Macbeth's will hardens into guilt and obsessive visions. The out-damned spot remains theater's great image of tragic madness. King Lear is the tragedy of fatherhood, age, loss, and insight. Demanding verbal vows of love, Lear rejects the one truthful daughter. He loses kingdom and reason. The play charts a personality's collapse. The final tableau with Cordelia's body is bereft of moral or comfort, only the truth of human frailty. No less striking is Richard, often read as Richard III, an anti-hero who addresses the audience directly, making them complicit in his crimes. His charisma and danger show Shakespeare's power to give voice to those we ought to fear and make us listen. Across these varied tragedies runs one current: no ready answers. Shakespeare shows rather than judges, inviting us to look hard at human nature, fears, weakness, desire, loss, hence their enduring force. Comedies and love, from Beatrice to Viola. If the tragedies open abysses, the comedies are spaces of play, freedom, and light, yet their ease is deceiving. Beneath disguises, mistakes, masquerades, and songs lie serious reflections on love, dignity, honesty, equality, and understanding. A hallmark is the vivid autonomy of women. They act, choose, argue, set the tempo, and drive the plot. Beatrice, in Much Ado About Nothing, spars with Benedick, some of theater's wittiest exchanges, built not on malice, but the insight that love demands honesty, not masks, and likely tailored for specific actors like Will Kemp and a boy actor in female roles, as women could not perform on stage. In As You Like It, Rosalind's inner strength moves the whole play. Exiled to the Forest of Arden, she dons male attire, tutors Orlando in love, tests him, and plays with roles. Disguise here reveals essence. Freedom breeds closeness. Twelfth Night turns disguise into music and philosophy. Viola, shipwrecked and thinking her brother lost, becomes the page Cesario to Duke Orsino. Orsino loves Olivia. Olivia falls for Cesario. Viola loves Orsino. The triangle resolves happily, while Festi the Clown's songs lace the froth with sober wisdom. A Midsummer Night's Dream mingles court, fairy quarrels, young lovers' tangles, and rustic theatricals. Love as enchantment, as dream, as force beyond control. Nick Bottom's donkey-headed romance with Titania isn't mere mockery. It's the absurd beauty of a world where even a weaver may be adored by a fairy queen. The Merchant of Venice is formally a comedy with a tragic pulse. Portia, shrewd and learned, cross-dresses as a lawyer to rescue her beloved from Shylock's legal snare. Her quality of mercy speech is powerful, yet Shylock himself compels conflicted sympathy. Humiliated, deceived, forced to convert, In such ambivalence, laughter and bitterness, justice and prejudice, lies the drama of Shakespeare's best. The tonal shift toward reconciliation emerges in the late romances like The Winter's Tale and Cymbeline. Separations and errors remain, but forgiveness, reunion, and rebirth come to the fore, the sense of a gentle farewell to the stage.
The Last Plays and a Farewell. By the 1610s, Shakespeare was part of England's cultural foundation, his company under royal patronage, his name synonymous with success. Yet his focus softened toward repentance, forgiveness, and reconciliation. Pericles, with George Wilkins, recounts a Phoenician prince's wanderings, shipwrecks, loss of wife and daughter, and miraculous reunion. The recognition scene's quiet emotion speaks louder than any speech. In Cymbeline, blends tragedy, comedy, and chronicle. Fathers misread daughters, husbands misread wives, yet ends in reunion and pardon. In The Winter's Tale, jealousy shatters a family. A son dies, a daughter is lost and found 16 years later, and the wife, long thought dead, returns in the astonishing statue scene. No flashy magic, but the inner miracle of time and forgiveness. The peak is The Tempest, the last play fully credited to Shakespeare alone. On a mysterious island, Prospero, an exiled Duke Magus, stages a shipwreck to ensnare his enemies, only to renounce revenge, free the spirits, break his staff, and abjure magic. Many read Prospero as Shakespeare himself, an artist laying down his art. The final collaboration with John Fletcher, the two noble kinsmen, shows a form already passing to the next generation. Around this time, he left London for Stratford-upon-Avon, to the largest house in town, living near his elder daughter Susanna, married to physician John Hall, and arranging the younger Judith's marriage. He managed property and lawsuits, staged now only in memory. In March 1616, he made his will, typical in form, yet telling details. Bequests to friends, kin, and theater partners. To Anne Hathaway, the second best bed, perhaps the marital bed rather than an insult. On April 23, 1616, aged 52, he died, cause unknown. Buried at Holy Trinity Church in Stratford, his grave bears the verse, "Blessed be the man that spares these stones, and cursed be he that moves my bones." Authorship uncertain, possibly his. 7 years later, friends published the first folio, 1623, collecting 36 plays, many otherwise lost, its title page bearing the iconic portrait and the tribute that he was not of an age, but for all time.
Who wrote Shakespeare? Riddles and Theories. Shakespeare died. 7 years later came the first folio, story complete, it would seem. Yet from the 18th to 19th centuries onward, doubts grew. Could a man from Stratford, with no university degree, modest biography, and no court position, write plays so rich in law, politics, medicine, history, foreign geography, and courtly etiquette? Thus arose the Shakespeare authorship question. The question doesn't deny Shakespeare's existence. Documents, signatures, legal records, and contemporaries attest him. It asks whether the name masked someone else. Early candidates included Francis Bacon, philosopher and jurist whose status, some argue, forbade association with low theater. Enthusiasts hunted ciphers pointing to him. Another was Edward de Vere, 17th Earl of Oxford, educated, well-traveled. Supporters claim only such a court insider could know Italy so well. The snag? De Vere died years before The Tempest, The Winter's Tale, Henry VIII, and other late plays. Proponents respond that the plays were written earlier and published later. Others proposed Christopher Marlowe, who faked his death, William Stanley, Earl of Derby, even Elizabeth I, or a committee of writers, citing stylistic shifts and known collaborations. Yet literary scholarship, linguistics, and stylometrics have repeatedly tested texts and contexts. The overwhelming consensus holds that William Shakespeare of Stratford was the principal author. His name appears during his lifetime tied to specific productions. He was a company shareholder. Colleagues compiled the first folio with testimonies. Ben Jonson, rival and friend, hailed him as the era's greatest dramatist. Why do doubts persist? Likely because the work is so vast and deep it seems unbelievable that one ordinary man could encompass so much craft, knowledge, psychology, and lyric power. Anti-Stratfordianism can be a form of awe, refusing to believe genius could be merely human. Societies in the 20th century kept the debate alive as cultural play, but no alternate candidate has left a corpus to rival Hamlet or King Lear. Perhaps the point isn't to unmask an author, but to ponder the phenomenon of genius itself. Whoever wrote them, the plays made Shakespeare a symbol beyond a person.
Shakespeare's immortality, a trace in culture and language. Decades passed, then centuries. The name did not fade. It became a symbol of art, language, theater, and human nature. The first step to that immortality was the First Folio. Thanks to it, we have Macbeth, The Tempest, Julius Caesar, As You Like It, and Twelfth Night. Its publication was both memorial and canon-making. Over time, the folio became a bibliophile's grail, Shakespeare, a classic of English and world literature. Across the 17th, 18th centuries, his plays stayed on stage, but were often improved for taste. Happy endings for tragedies, trimmed monologues, rewritten scenes. One King Lear ended with Cordelia marrying Edgar. Only in the 19th century did a movement restore original texts and authorial intent, and the image of Shakespeare as national genius and universal thinker crystallized. The 19th century saw his European triumph. German romantics like August Schlegel hailed him as creative freedom incarnate. In Russia, he was kin to Pushkin and Dostoevsky. Translators carried not just plots, but poetic density, making Hamlet, Othello, and Romeo and Juliet feel native in many tongues. The 20th century opened the screen. Olivier's Hamlet, Henry V, Richard III, Orson Welles' Macbeth and Othello, Kurosawa's Throne of Blood recasting Macbeth as samurai tragedy, Baz Luhrmann's Romeo plus Juliet in modern America with Shakespeare's text, even Disney's The Lion King echoes Hamlet. Linguistically, over 1,500 English words are first attested in his works, along with dozens of phrases that became idioms, now so common we forget their source. He's taught in schools and studied in universities worldwide. The plays are translated, adapted, and endlessly reinterpreted, each reading adding new meaning. His legacy endures because it permits infinite staging. Hamlet as a psychological drama, philosophical tragedy, or political pamphlet. Julius Caesar as a republic's collapse. The Tempest as a parable of forgiveness. Macbeth as addiction to power. The plays transplant easily into any era without losing force. They speak to the timeless: fear, love, betrayal, choice, power, pain, hope. Shakespeare didn't just speak to his contemporaries, he forged a language for speaking about the human in any century. Born in a small town, living a comparatively unostentatious life, and dying without fanfare, he became a voice, sounding through the ages, a symbol not of one time, but of the very nature of theater, language, and the human soul.